Thank you very much for participating today. I'm very happy to welcome SAMI NADER. He's an economist and director of the Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs from Beirut directly. I'm very happy to welcome you, and especially also that you and your family are safe and that we can see you in good health. So thank you very much for discussing today with us on the topic Lebanon, a failed state. You're welcome to be here. I would also like to welcome Hannes SWOBODA, President of the International Institute for Peace and former MEP. So he will then also try to elaborate a little bit on what SAMI has been saying. My name is Stephanie FENKART. I'm the Director of the International Institute for Peace. I'm going to moderate this session. I will pose some questions, but of course the focus will be on our expert, especially from Lebanon right now. And I would also like to ask the participants joining here live to ask questions if they have some questions, or also on Facebook. We are live streaming on Facebook. You can also post questions there, and my colleagues will then pass it over to me. Maybe a very, very short introduction for those not really that familiar with what has been going on in Lebanon. I mean, probably most of the people heard about the big explosion of a large amount of ammonium nitrate in the port of Beirut in March. I mean, nearly 200 people died, around 6,500 people have been injured, and 300,000 displaced. So it has really been a very, very big explosion. It could have been felt even until Cyprus. And all that came along with an already ongoing political and economic crisis within Lebanon. We had people protesting already since October 2019. And in the aftermath of the explosion, then the government resigned. And additionally, we also have regional and foreign powers which play its role in the region. And we heard lately about the treaty between Israel and the Emirates, and also between Bahrain. So this also reshapes somehow the power relations within the regions. And it also somehow, of course, revoked the frustration within the Palestinian societies living in Lebanon, but also in Palestine, because we cannot and should not forget also that Lebanon is one of the countries which hosts the biggest per capita number of refugees. We will now discuss the actual situation in Lebanon, what political arrangements are likely to become true in the future, and what is the role of regional and foreign powers, and is there still a chance to overcome the manifold challenges Lebanon is facing, like literally on all fronts these days, and how and if Lebanon is able to change its course. I would like to start with you, Sami, and just by a very brief question, a little bit going back to the history, because when we talk about Lebanon, we know that it was referred to in the 70s before the Civil War as the Switzerland of the Middle East, and also as the only democracy, probably not a perfect one, but the only democracy in the Arab world. Now we see the political and economic turmoil led to the designation of the government. And my question would be if you could elaborate on the reasons behind the economic and political crisis, and what you see in the upcoming future, and how the situation in Lebanon is right now. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Hannes, for organizing this. This is a great opportunity to meet you again and to share some ideas and thoughts about my country and about a very, important region that is shaping the international power dynamic at the international level. So I would start, if you want, by saying what was prevailing before this October revolution, because it's a key moment in the Lebanese recent history. Then talk after about this revolution, why this is something important, why there is a transition in the making, and that my third point would be about the Beirut Blast, what happened, and because this is something really completely surreal. This is cataclysmic. This is an explosion that never happened, maybe the fourth important one after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, this is something. And I will talk, my last point would be about the French initiative now that is taking place, trying to find an arrangement. How big are the chances of this to succeed? And maybe afterwards for the Q&A, we can talk about the new dynamic in the region, in Eastern Mediterranean, and the peace or the peace treaty between Israel and some Gulf countries. So before this revolution, what led to this revolution? There were a deep economic crisis in the making. And why is that? Because the political models that was prevailing, that was put together after the civil war, the Ta'if agreement, this model has collapsed. It was relying, it put together, or it installed a rentier economy, not a productive economy, a rentier economy, and it failed at both levels. It failed at the political level, and it failed at the economic level. Why it's important to say that today? Because a similar model was being contemplated as a solution for Syria and for Iraq. What is this model? This model is to say that here are the communities, the sectarian group that are fighting each other. Let's put them in one government. We come up with a national unity government, and this is enough to bring the conflict from the street inside the Council of Ministers. And this proved to be not working, because it eliminates the role of the opposition, the role of control, the accountability. And this model of national unity government, putting together the chief of tribe, the chief of sectarian groups into one council of ministers, is the other face of corruption. This is an institutionalized corruption, because after years, what happened? Every ministry turned to be a private property for the party that is overseeing it. And look at the current problem today. The two Shia party, Hezbollah and Amal, don't want to release, and this is the point of conflict today. This is why it's blocking the formation of government. They want to keep the Ministry of Finance, because they think that this is their right. And this is nothing mentions something like this in the constitution, of course, and this is against any rule of good governance. So I would say that the political model that was put in place is collapsing, is not working, and is responsible of the economic crisis. The economic crisis, in a nutshell, it's that this absence of accountability led the government to spend lavishly without any control. This is how Lebanon piled up a huge debt, the second most important worldwide after Japan. And for the last 9 years, since 2011, Lebanon has no growth. The average growth is 1%. The last year and this year is, of course, negative. We are into a recession, and this year we're expecting a 15% minus 15% growth. I mean, a deep recession. This is due to the COVID and to the crisis. However, no growth. And what we call the twin deficit. That means deficit of the balance of payment and the deficit of the budget. And this led to this unprecedented economic crisis. The monetary policy that was put in place to go along with this rentier policy is to fix the exchange rate artificially, to put high interest rate in order to attract capital and to finance the public debt. This ended up into a huge Ponzi scheme. This is the only Ponzi scheme that is put together not by Madoff, but by a government, and a central bank. So this is when it comes to the economic crisis and its relationship with the political crisis. I don't dwell more onto this. Maybe we keep it for the question. And then, I mean, against this background came the October Revolution. What was really surprising in this revolution, the good sign of the revolution, it's that the first time in Lebanon history, we had all the regions, that means across sectarian groups, demonstrating for the same cause, claiming their economic and social right. No political slogan. And this was, I mean, an act of citizenship. And this is what, I always repeat that the civil war ended with this revolution. When this revolution, because for the first time, people were finding a common ground as citizen and not as member of sectarian group. This is how we see a demonstration taking place in the north, in Tripoli, the big city in the north, which is the stronghold of the Muslim Sunnis. At the same time, the same peaceful demonstration taking place in Nabatieh, the stronghold of Hezbollah, the Shia city, in the Ashrafiyya, the Christian city of Beirut, and in the Druze mountain. So this was something unprecedented. It took place for 3 months, a kind of national party. However, this was the main reason was it was driven by unemployment, by lack of growth. It was against corruption. It was against the establishment. I like to call it the Arab Spring versus 3.0, because we had 3 versions. We had the version of the first wave of Arab Spring. Then we had the one taking place in North Africa, namely in Algeria and in Sudan. They didn't want to topple the regime. They wanted evolution, not revolution. And the one of Lebanon, they wanted that change from within the constitution, because they were asking for snap election, and they were asking about a government, they were asking for, and they keep asking today, of government of independent, not belonging to this political establishment. So in this sense, they wanted to get rid of the sectarian system. But this was, this was felt as a threat by all the political parties, and namely by Hezbollah. Why Hezbollah? Because Hezbollah is the party who has who controls the system. Because at the end of the day, he's the major stakeholder, and he got the upper hand. And especially after the last election, not only he owns his own army, his state inside the state, but in 2018, and thanks to its alliance and a new electoral law, they could win a majority inside the parliament. Before 2018, there were a balance between Hezbollah, its arm, it's an alliance with Iran, and the parties who was controlling, who got the upper hand militarily. But this was his presence, and his role was counterbalanced by an alliance of party. At that time, it was called 14th of March, who got the majority in the institution, in the government, in the parliament. Now it's not the case anymore. this is why Hezbollah felt threatened by this revolution, although the revolution never pointed to Hezbollah and its arms. Now more and more people are asking, are talking about it, but at first no. And Hassan Nasrallah put himself in front, or he confronted the revolution. There were two counter-revolutions. The first one was an attempt, and it was conducted by Hezbollah, trying to depict this revolution as a conspiracy prepared by the West, and namely by America. This did not work. Then came the second counter-revolution, trying to drag it into the sectarian turf, trying to say to his people that the Shias are threatened, and this is a ploy against the Shia community. And this is what's taking place today. And you know, when the two Shia parties send their mobs in the street to confront the peaceful demonstrators or the peaceful protester, and they were carrying the slogan Shia, 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 that's all. The partisans of Hezbollah, the mobs of Hezbollah, were chanting this slogan. This was a strategy to stir the sectarian fears, you know, the religious sentiments, in order, and I dare to say this succeeded partially. And this is why you see today that this revolution calmed down because of three factors. First of all, the economic reasons. The youth got despaired, especially after the Beirut Blast. They are leaving the country, and those who were championing this revolution. Second, the COVID-19 impact. The COVID-19 has a huge impact in the Arab street, and namely, where soft revolution were taking place because people couldn't take, were social distancing and couldn't take the streets anymore. And third, because of this religious sentiment, they are back to their, close identities. So this is my take on the revolution and the counter-revolution. However, this revolution, it's true that it did not organize itself. It failed to organize itself. It failed to succeed into the transition. However, it succeeded to topple two governments since October. It succeeded to impose a veto power, because the Hariri, this national unity government I was complaining about, I'm saying it collapsed, and they tried to come to satisfy the people protesting, saying, what you want? An independent government? This is an independent government. They came up with this Diab government, which has the facade, the look of an independent government, because they assigned excellent minister with excellent resume, however, with no power. They were controlled from behind the scenes by the traditional parties. Then came the Beirut Blast. This was something that, this is a turning point, because its impact in the memories is something that one could not forget. I like to call it, this is the Lebanese Auschwitz, in the impact it has on the minds, and every single Lebanese up to now is talking where he was that moment, and every single Lebanese has someone who have been killed, who have been wounded, and it's still very present in the memory. And they are accusing the system. You know, there were this graffiti that was of a picture of this blast, and that this graffiti saying my government did that. So this is where, and the one that is accused and that is perceived as responsible of this is the system. It's the system. This is how corruption can turn criminal, but at a big scale. Although, we know that there is a huge quantity of nitrate of ammonium that were stored at the port. Tons. How a system can allow a government, authorities, and everyone knew that a huge quantity of nitrate of ammonium was stored. And now there are investigations trying to, and the report on the media, how this get into Lebanon. But what was the trigger? Is this, sorry, I had a cut in electricity. This is something often in Lebanon. So it will come, don't worry, because this is part of the system that's, okay now. So just to say that, okay. Yes, we know that this huge quantity of explosive material got into Lebanon. But what triggered the explosion? Here there are two theories. The most common theory that this is the theory of accident. And this, it seems to please to everyone. And even to the businesses, because maybe the reinsurer can pay or can pay at least a share of what has been destructed. But let us recall that the day of the accident, the American president, when asked, he talked about a bomb. He said, one of my generals talked about a bomb. Whether this is an accident or a military operation, I do believe that we as Lebanese have the right to know what happens. And the international community as well should push for this truth to be known. This is the basic right of those who lost dear one, and to know the truth. And up to now, and 40 days after the blast, there is no one indictment. There are investigations, and the French are investigating, the FBI is investigating, a team from Turkey is investigating, but the Lebanese justice. But this is why we do need a kind of international justice in order to hold accountable those who are responsible and to know the truth. We don't want only to know the truth about how these materials get into our port, get into the heart of a city. But we do want to know what triggered this blast. Is it a military operation or an accident? And when we talk about the port of Beirut, we're talking about the heart of a city that is 7,000 years old. This port was built in the 19th century by the Ottoman, and at that time Beirut was a harbor, small city, and it was built and developed around the sport activity. Because here we're not in an industrial economy, we're a trading economy. What we do, we import, we export. And when this port was destroyed, it's the whole web. It's the whole economic web that is destroyed, the social web. And the destruction, has has a radius of 3 kilometers, practically 40% of the city. So this is maybe enough about this. I have been too much emotional about it. But now, after this blast, it drew the attention of the French. And the French, 48 hours, Mr. Macron, the President Macron, jumped into the scene. He came to Beirut, and he went to the street, he went to the port, and he was the first politician. No Lebanese politician went to the street just to check what happened. So he was welcomed as a hero, and he could sense the real feeling of and the anger of the population, and the total refusal of the political establishment that is now responsible of this huge crime. It's the system that is in place. It's not only corrupt, but it's criminal. However, in my view, Mr. Macron, I mean, and here maybe it's a kind of critic, I mean, in my view, he overpromised, and I'm afraid he will underdeliver. The way he's trying to do, he called the political parties and he said, he presented a roadmap. This roadmap is to form an independent government, no political parties, and to impose the alternation system, that no ministries is kept by a political party, which is very good. But here he faced the refusal of what we call the duopoly of the Shias, Amal and Hezbollah. So he has, and we don't know if Amal and Hezbollah are having this firm position. They are blocking the French initiative because for domestic reason, because they want to capitalize on the military gains, the fact that they have the upper hand on the military side, they can overthrow the government at any point in time, or because Iran doesn't really want to facilitate this, because Iran wants to keep this card as a bargaining card, and they do know that the real deal is to be done by the American. What's worth mentioning is 1 week after the French initiative, Washington put sanctions on 2 key former ministers, touching not Hezbollah, but the allies of Hezbollah, the close ally of Hezbollah, and very senior figures. Mr. Fenianos, Minister of Transport, and Mr. Hassan Khalil, former Minister of Finance, the right hand of Mr. Nabih Berri, the chief of Amal. So, was it a US attempt to torpedo the French initiative? I could ask the question to Mr. Hale, because the American envoy to Lebanon, I met him as an expert, I was called, and I told him about how close they are to the French initiative. He said that maybe they used the wrong word, but they are backing up this French initiative. But it looks like that the American have as well their red lines. Washington is exerting what we call the policy of maximum pressure on the maximum pressure on Iran, and this translated into sanctions. So Mr. Macron has on one hand, Iran that does not want to give in, because it's like they are realizing they are not betting on the right horse, and this French initiative couldn't alleviate the sanctions, and 1 week after they had to face new sanctions. And on the other hand, an American administration that openly criticized France receiving or meeting with one Hezbollah guys and not acting as Germany and as UK, the European parties who used to have open channel with Tehran and now stop, and they joined the American position labeling Hezbollah terrorist organization. So here is the deadlock. The deadlock is that the French has, at the end of the day, very little leverage and very narrow margin of maneuver. And if it looks like, and this is an analysis, that no government will be formed yet, and that Iran is waiting the next US elections to see with whom they can do a deal. And meanwhile, they will keep holding all the cards, among them facilitating the formation of government in Lebanon. However, can Lebanon withstand to wait as long? It will be a huge price. It will be a huge price because up to now, the Lebanese pound has lost 90% of its value. Unemployment is 45%. People, we were seeing last week, both people, I don't know if you see it on TV, people are taking small barks and trying to go to Cyprus, and there they drown. We've seen people drown in the sea because they are trying to flee the country. This is something unseen. This is both people, real scenes. The last point I want to or I will keep it for after the question. If there are any questions, I want to talk about the dynamic in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Thank you very much, Sami, for a very elaborate picture you already painted. Unfortunately, not that bright in specific regards. I mean, you mentioned the problems with the sectarian system and the unity government, the high corruption, and then, of course, also the role of Hezbollah. But I think it's also very important what you mentioned about the October Revolution, that people not divided by sectarian lines actually came together to claim their social and economic rights. Maybe, Hannes, I know that you have been traveling there many times. I know you know the country. We even traveled there together. Of what Sami said right now about this whole situation, the blast which really affected the people living in Lebanon in an unimaginable amount. What would you say about the French initiative? Sami was already mentioning it, but also then Hezbollah on the other side, and then when it comes to the sectarian system. How would you assess the situation? First, maybe a little bit from a domestic point of view, but then, of course, we should also talk a little bit about the region itself. I mean, we know the regions to its neighbors, and Sami can afterwards maybe also conclude a little bit on that, but not only to Israel, but of course also to Saudi Arabia, and who used to be like to give a lot of money to Lebanon before, and now it's of course not really that attractive these days. Hannes, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sami, for this very interesting and detailed report. I mean, maybe I have two questions. The one is on the revolution. We see in several countries that these revolutions of people, mass movement, at the end of the day, if the government or if the system stays strong, it's not going to succeed. Of course, COVID is a very disastrous event for the revolution. We saw it also in Egypt, in Algeria, where it is similar. The system just blocks. Of course, it's not the same system, but nevertheless. And of course, in an extreme way, we have it now in Belarus, in Europe. So my question would be, do you see any chance that in spite of people leaving and being in despair, that some sort of revolution can revitalize? That was my first question. The second one is on your very interesting remarks at the end about the French and the American. I mean, what we see is that America, in the one hand, is withdrawing military from the region, but on the other hand, is trying to find an alliance, especially Israel and some Arab countries, against Iran. Iran is the main enemy, and there are many reasons to be very critical about Iran and its activities, and you mentioned some of them. And that means that also Lebanon can be the victim of that geopolitical fight or regional fight, and the whole reconstruction of the region as such. And of course, in addition comes, maybe you mentioned that, and that would be also interesting, what is happening in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So my question also in that connection would be also, what is Turkey's role? You mentioned that they also look into the question of what were the reasons and the roots of the blast. Is Turkey playing a certain role? Is Turkey, or is it just refraining? Is it a too hot potato? The situation in Lebanon. So the one would be on the revolution. Is there any chance of revitalizing it? And the others is perhaps the regional context, US, France, Iran, and Turkey.
I would say you can answer directly.
Yeah, the two very important questions. First of all, the revolution. The revolution, I mean, every time I meet with an international partner, international official, and my number one demand is help us to protect the protesters, because they have been subject to a crackdown, an important crackdown, especially during the COVID-19. The security forces took the opportunity to crack down on militants directly from the mobs of the duo, Shia duopoly, Hezbollah and Amal, when they took to the street with sticks and tried and started to beat the demonstrator and to burn the tents, because I used to have, to do conferences in one tent in Martyr Square. They burned it, and they burned all the tents. They used violence. And Saturday, 4 days after the revolution, when the Lebanese took the street again and they rekindled this revolution, but with a high level of anger, they were faced with live bullet harness. The police of the parliament, we have something called the security forces of the parliament, shoot live bullet on them. Live bullet. It's true, it was with hunting guns, but these are live bullets. And we hear serious injuries among the protesters. But despite that said, I'm seeing the revolution, yes, be rekindled, but maybe not with the same, not in the same manner, peaceful manner, because now you have more anger after the blast. You have a real hunger. 40% of the Lebanese population is under the line of steep poverty, not poverty. 60% are under the line of poverty, but steep poverty, that we can say the hunger is here. So I'm seeing a more aggressive revolution. I hope it will not turn into a civil war, because it can, given the now high sectarian tensions that was on purpose stirred. Or the third, I talked about two counter-revolution. I'm afraid that the third one can be to drag the country into a civil war to finish, to extinguish manu militari this revolution. However, if this revolution is protected in a way, they are facing through sanctions real threat, real, I mean, it's one way to protect the revolution is to put under direct threat those who are attacking it. Yes, in my view, it will rekindle, and it's still simmering. It's still simmering. It's in the hearts and in the minds. This is when it comes to your very important question about the revolution and its chance to rekindle. The second one, I would say, yes. Let's start by Mr. Macron, 15 days ago, in the Swiss city of Lugano. He had a speech on the Eastern Mediterranean. And he had he said why France is intervening. He said because the Americans are withdrawing and the NATO is withdrawing, and traditionally the security in this part of the world was ensured by the American and more particularly by the NATO, and because the NATO is withdrawing, we jumped into the scene in order to ensure our security, because, and it's true, what's the Eastern Mediterranean region, it's the southern frontier of Europe. And this is of high importance. It's not only about the oil and gas and the war that is taking place for the delimitation of the maritime borders, but as well, it's very important because of the migration from the north, from the south to the north, and from the east, from Lebanon and Syria today to inside Europe. So having this under control is of prime importance. And I would say this is the new element. I'm not sure the Americans are withdrawing, because what we've seen today, this gathering, this alliance they put together to discuss the gas, putting together Greece, Egypt, Italy, into one, Cyprus, into one alliance. This shows, and Mr. Pompeo said it, we're interested. This is a strategic region for us. But what's new is the comeback of two regional power that were on the sideline, Russia and Turkey. Russia and Turkey are duplicating the model they put in place in Syria into Libya. They went there supporting opposing parties, Turkey supporting Sarraj, Russia supporting Haftar, but they, at the same time, they are not fighting each other. They know how to manage their conflict. And it's this comeback of the regional power in a very aggressive way is key. And today, before I joined the webinar, 1 hour ago, Mr. Erdogan is giving a very important speech. He's calling for an international conference to discuss the energy issue. At least now, the cards are open on the table, and we've been talking about this when I was invited at your institute, 2 years last year. We're talking about, Europe has been built by an agreement on on steel and coal. And this Middle East, I mean, this has to be discussed. It shouldn't be under the table. What is at stake? I think it's four major issues. The gas, but I'm not sure the gas has real economic value, because it's 2,000 feet under the water. And when you talk to experts in energy, they said it's not economically efficient. Really? However, the pipelines, and this is where this intervention in Libya is important, because they want to cut the road on the East Med pipeline. And the East Med is not only to link the wells in the East Mediterranean. You have to put it in perspective with this agreement that was achieved signed between Israel and the Gulf countries. This is a pipeline that is feeding Europe without going through Turkey or Russia. Then you have the immigration issue, which is very important, and this new roles or the comeback of the regional powers. Turkey is having a role, a say in Lebanon. They are more and more present economically, culturally in the city of Tripoli, which is a Sunni stronghold. And Mr. Macron yesterday has to phone to the Russian president because he wanted help in the formation of a government in Lebanon. So this dynamic, and this is a new dynamic in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is happening after the Pax Americana era and after the war on terror dynamic. Now you have a comeback of the regional power as key players in the region.
Thank you. We do have already 3 questions, but most of them deal with domestic issues. So, but still, maybe Hannes, you want maybe to say something on the geopolitics? No. Okay. So I would like to ask you, one of the questions asks about the Lebanese government and its construction on the sectarian system. The question is if there is a chance that Lebanon can develop economic prosperity and into a more democratic state if those religious elites have so much power. So is there any chance at all that these elites allow changes for a transformation of the system? Sami, I would say the question is for you. So what do you say? Like, what structural problems, what preconditions would probably Lebanon need in order to get this structural reforms of the problems with the sectarian system?
I think that what we've seen, what was great about this revolution at the very start, it has a secular spirit and a non-sectarian spirit as well. However, now the change cannot go through the traditional political parties, because this is, for them, reforming is suicide. They are living out of the system. A sectarian political party in Lebanon, in a nutshell, what he's saying to his own community, a Christian traditional party is saying, for instance, it's the same in the Sunni and in the Shia, but it's the same narrative. They are saying, you are threatened. I'm here to represent you and defend your rights because you are threatened. It's based on fears, and it has been the case for 100 years. And the Shia, what they are saying, you have been disenfranchised during the inception of Lebanon. Now you have the arm. Now you have the upper hand. It's time to have a bigger share on the power. We will not go and clean shoes anymore. But this is why their business model relies on the sectarian system. They cannot reform because for them reforming is killing themselves. This is why we need a revolution. We need this drastic change coming, and it was about to succeed, but it bumped against Hezbollah and its regional agenda, because they put all their means in order to counter this. They needed the system. The system was used as a cover. However, is Hezbollah the only responsible of corruption? Of course, no. And maybe the other parties were more corrupt, but it was his price to pay to keep the alliance and to keep the system going.
So maybe just to summarize, because one of the questions also asks that the protesters demand a technocratic government to be formed to overcome these sectarian tensions. So I guess this is also probably not really feasible these days, or what is your
yeah, this is my problem with the French initiative, but this is a catch-22 thing, because Mr. Macron, the French president, is asking the traditional parties to come up with an independent government. This cannot work. They will not. They will not. They will not if they are not forced to. And does he have enough leverage to force them? But to bring about an independent government, that means something that is not coming from the ranks. You should have a lot of leverage, because he's saying, I did not elect these parties, you elected them. And he has to go as a realist, he has to go through the system. But the system cannot generate anything but itself. This is the catch-22. This is why we're pushing, as people who are like trying to drive for change or to champion change, to say, let's go for snap elections. Let's go for election. Even on this tweaked electoral law, I think we have enough momentum to bring about at least some changes in the system.
Hannes, do you want to add something?
No, not for the moment, no.
Okay, because there is another question which I think is interesting, and both are from Gudrun Kramer, and one is which role does Dahlan, I guess she's referring to Mohammed Dahlan, playing in the recent regional peace agreements between Israel, the Emirates, and Bahrain? What would you say?
Dahlan is very close. This is a very interesting question from someone who seems to follow very closely the Palestinian file. I know Mr. Dahlan is very close to UAE leadership, and I'm sure he played a key role in this rapprochement. What's interesting about this rapprochement is the kind of Middle East we will have. Yesterday I made this comment, I don't know how much it's right, but I mean, I'm seeing, because this is a disruptive phenomenon, and this will lead into Middle East going at two different speed. It's like the two Europe. In Eastern Europe and the Western Europe, two different model, two different ideology, two different economic systems. And so on one hand, you have this, the Gulf countries and Israel, synergies on technology, on economic model, but on the other hand, an axis of resistance. They are aggressive. They have a very stark ideology. They have still some clout on the ground, a kind of religious feeling. I mean, and this Middle East going at two different and opposing speed, it is, I mean, it would be a very dynamic situation, let's say.
Okay, and last question, and I'm pretty sure also Hannes will, oh no, there's another one then coming up, but one of the questions is about the GCPOA and in relation to the US elections, and the question is, will the GCPOA negotiations, so the nuclear deal with Iran, start again after US elections, and will they include the Iranian support to Hezbollah? What would you think? I mean, this is to the future, but probably depending on who will win, but...
Yeah, I'm sure that if Biden win, he said it clearly that he will try to revive the GCPOA and to commit against to this deal, and this is what the Iranian are betting for. I mean, the Iranian started. However, if Trump is re-elected, I'm sure that he will go for a deal, and the Iranian will go for a deal, but it will be for them at a higher price, and they know that. And actually, before the COVID-19, they were started to negotiate, the Trump administration and it's no secret, and the Iranian. And we have started to see the first sign of this negotiation. We had the government in Iraq, a pro-American Mr. Qasimi, and we had an exchange of hostages. These were small indicators that the negotiations were going on. Then the COVID-19 broke out. In my view, and this is my analysis, the Iranian made the calculation that the chances of Trump are now decreasing, because before the COVID-19, he was given as a winner. They preferred to negotiate with him before and strike a deal before he is elected, so they can get a better price or a better return. When the COVID-19 happened, they saw that it had a huge impact on Trump and on its chances to be re-elected. They stopped the negotiation and they took a stiff line. But in both cases, whether with Biden or with Trump, I do believe that the Iranian and American will have a deal.
Hannes, please, what do you think about the GCPOA, the future of the GCPOA after the elections?
I think that is very interesting. I read today a comment that Biden would not just come back to the original deal, but make the question of the militias and of the whole regional issue for Trump. And I think what Trump now reached, and without favoring him as a person or as a president, that this alliance and this involvement, strengthening the alliance between Israel and some of the Gulf countries, give him more leverage in the discussion with Iran. And I think we had yesterday, Stephanie and myself, talked with the new ambassador, Iranian ambassador in Austria, when he also hinted that maybe a hardliner will win the next presidential election in Iran. This could even be helpful for finding a deal, because a Rouhani, or a type like Rouhani, would not have the leverage or the power in Iran to come to a deal. So in some way, this could be bad for the civil rights and whatever, but for coming to a deal or to a new, more comprehensive agreement, which would have been, of course, a regional agreement, would, of course, be much more important. I think Russia would not be very interested in having it. So now you hear the bells of the churches. But I think Sami is right. I think a deal could come, but it will be not the same deal. It will be broader, more comprehensive. The regional stability and for peace in the region.
Yeah, I totally agree with this reading. I'm totally in line with you on this. I mean, the two issues that they want to discuss as a complement, as to complement this deal on the nuclear side, they will go back to the GCPOA, but this is not enough. They want to find an arrangement on the missile. This is key for Israel, for the Gulf countries, is a matter of security, and on the what we call Iranian behavior, malign behavior in the region. But mainly the question of missiles.
Yeah. And probably also including then China in the long term, of course. There are two more questions, and I want to take them before we then finish. One is, again, about the sectarian tensions. The question is it, if the tensions are on the political level, is there a danger that that the tension on the level of civil society also creates tensions among regular citizens? And the next one is actually also close to that, so maybe we can put them together. So the next question is that the revolution and getting rid from this confessionalism as a system, even though young people maybe even supported to this idea and has a large acceptance among the population of the system to ensure peace. But what do you think, how such a transfer would be possible without risking a new civil war?
You know, every time there is this fears about the civil war, I try to bring to the memory what happened from October to February of this year. I mean, for the last months, what we have seen is something that offers the total opposite of a country that is going to civil war, because this was all the regions chanting one slogan, and this made me say that now it's on October 17 that we ended up the civil war, because it was like they depicted a like national picture and they developed a common platform. Now the civil society can be affected by this sectarian provocation. Not yes, but no. They will not go to war, of course, and they will not forget about this revolution. However, the revolution as well, the people, the activists, don't think the same when it comes to politics. They all want to get rid of corruption. They all want job. They all want, transparency. But there are differences. I try to divide it in like three groups. The groups that are very keen about sovereignty and about dealing with Hezbollah arms. The one in the middle, they don't want to make the Hezbollah arm as a key issue. Why? Because it's led by Shia intellectuals and Shia liberals who don't agree with Hezbollah, but who are still a little intimidated by the clout this party has in their own community. He was the one who liberated the land, and this question of resistance against Israel has something divine, sacred in their mentality. And you have a third part, which are more the leftists, and so this is to say that the civil society is not homogeneous. It is diversified, but they could, they succeeded at least into forming a veto power. And this is why I think the election would be an opportunity in order to prepare for this transition and to prepare for the emergence of new parties. There won't be one party representing the civil society. I'm sure that there will be different new parties representing the civil society, which is a very good thing to do. To have. In that sense, the second question was about what?
The second, you already answered it, but I just take the last question now. It's also from Gudrun, and it's also quite specific. And she asks about how would you read the meeting between Hania, so from Hamas, and Nasrallah a couple days ago.
Very important question. I think it was, the French initiative and the American sanctions and the pressure on Iran was accompanied on the domestic side by a call for neutrality. And this effort was led by the Maronite Patriarch, which is at the same time, he was relaying the position of not only France, but of the Vatican, which has a kind of historic role because the Christian in Lebanon, most of them they have close relation with the Vatican on the spiritual side. And the way, and Hezbollah didn't welcome this neutrality. Every time we talk about neutrality since the former President Sulaiman, they don't like it. To distantiate ourselves from the regional conflict, they don't like it because this would mean take a distance from Iran. And they always try to depict it as normalizing with Israel. But never, when the patriarch or like intellectual talk about neutrality in Lebanon or the principle of distanciation, like you have social distancing, you have a political distancing, that to keep a distance from the regional powers, non-alignment. And this is a core principle in Lebanon, in my view. This is at the heart of the Lebanese Pact. When the Lebanese decided the independence, it was when the Christians said, we don't want our alliance with France, and we don't want to have our own Christian small state. And the Sunnis said as well, we are renouncing to be part of Great Syria. So this was the core contract in Lebanon to the neutrality, non-alignment on regional axis. And Hezbollah doesn't like this. The way he responded he invited, this is my reading, Haniyeh, saying, no, we are committed to align with the Palestinian and with Iran. And Haniyeh is the symbol of the Palestinians supported by Iran and carrying the Palestinian cause. And to say that there is an axis going from Gaza to Beirut to Syria, maybe to Damascus to Tehran, and this is the axis of resistance, and we're here. It was their way to counter this American and Western pressure. However, what's interesting, this was criticized by the Syrian regime allies in Lebanon, and namely by Russia. And so we could saw because of this Haniyeh visit, critics coming from within Hezbollah allies, his pro-Syrian friend, and even the party of the President Aoun, who were critics about Mr. Haniyeh visit.
Thank you very much. Hannes, do you still want to add something?
Just want to say thank you very much. It was very interesting, and I think
it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Not only about Lebanon, but much more. And it's always good to have your intellectual creativity and capacity. And of course, good luck and good health. And let's have some positive thinking about development in Lebanon and in the region. Thank you very much.
And we're happy to welcome you in Lebanon whenever you can.
If COVID allows again, we will come.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, also from my side, Sami, thank you very much for participating. I mean, we talked even longer than we expected, but we are very happy that people are interested still in the topic of Lebanon, what is going on. I mean, I think it is important what you mentioned also from the personal level after the blast, what happened to the people, the poverty, the corruption, but also a little bit of the brighter side, that people came together on the streets and were not division by sectarian lines, but really like had this common cause, and let's see what happens out there. there. For us as Europeans, I think even though we have the pandemic here, we have what is going on in Belarus and upcoming US elections, Lebanon is part of our neighborhood, and what is happening there is also of our concern. So thank you very much for sharing your insights, and please take care and stay safe, you and your family, and we hope to see you soon. And for all the others, the International Institute for Peace will stay focused on the region, of course, as well. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on our webpage, iipvienna.com. Have a nice evening, and thanks again to Hannes and Sami, and good evening. Thank you. Goodbye.